court says they're valid. Just because you sign one doesn't mean it's necessarily valid.
So we don't really know till after we sign one and we end up in court, correct?
Oh, very much so. That's correct.
So who's going to be handing these to us and what will they say?
Okay, so most likely it's going to be someone in the front of the restaurant or the gym or the store or the hair salon. And essentially, what they're going to say is, we are now waiving ourselves out of liability if we're negligent. Has to be in simple language, has to be in big type, but essentially that's what the business thinks they're doing, and that's what they're going to tell you they're doing. But like I said, it's subject to a court interpretation.
So what am I waiving when I sign a waiver?
Okay, so if the waiver is done correctly in terms of type and explanation, you're probably waiving the right to have a successful lawsuit if the business has what's called ordinary negligence. Now, I'll give you some examples. Maybe that's there wasn't enough disinfectant at the right intervals, or they didn't watch everybody on the social distancing. However, the business cannot contract themselves out of gross negligence. And that would be, for example, a restaurant putting tables 2 feet apart, or a gym letting an employee stay at work knowing he's sick. So that's a very different thing, and that's what a court's going to look at.
So they can't avoid gross negligence, but can they avoid court by sneaking in our arbitration clause?
Well, that's a question, and that's a question that the courts are going to look at as well, because you have a public health and safety standard, and there's a public interest, of course, of the government to make sure that someone is not doing things that is out of the norm for public health. And since this is a pandemic, the public interest is a very high one. So that's going to be another question for the courts.
Who's being asked to sign them right now? What industries, what businesses are using them as we speak?
I've heard about restaurants in other states that have opened, and gyms in other states that have opened. And I think what the problem here is businesses think it's a cure-all. It's not. It's going to be subject to court interpretation. And consumers may think, well, I can always sue for negligence if I get COVID from an establishment. Well, that's a very high standard of proof. It's not like being on a cruise ship or a nursing home where we can trace it back to where it happened. So even if you can sue, and even if you can prove negligence, you still have to prove that the cause of your COVID was that particular establishment, and that is an extremely high bar.
Well, let me ask you this. Would you sign a waiver?
Me personally, probably not. The first thing I would do, though, is I would, and I tell every consumer to do this, read it, inspect the premises, ask lots of questions, ask them, why am I signing a waiver? Is there something wrong with your health and safety precautions here? And then I would say to myself, unless this is the most extremely necessary thing I need to do in my life at this moment, I'm in San Francisco. I can go to 100 different restaurants, many different gyms, many different hair salons. So if I don't like what I see, I walk out.